Welcome to Political Singularity, the show that tries to bridge the gap between the left and the right. I'm your host, Evan Erickson. Today we have ScotchOikos. He's a Canadian political commentator and talks about a wide range of issues from Trump to AOC, climate change, and so on. Scotch, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I've been following you for a while now. The first video that stuck out to me was your analysis on climate change. I believe you made it after the IPCC's warning that we have about 12 years left for dramatic change.
Yeah, I think I remember the video you're referring to. I believe it was titled "Climate Change: Are We All Going to Die?" or something like that.
Yeah, and you stuck out just on how nuanced you were, and you gave kind of both sides of a story, and I felt like you didn't really have an agenda. You seem to be one of the new brand of YouTubers out there that just tries to get to the bottom of a story, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks. I mean, that's quite a good thing to hear, because that's what I can only hope to strive for, really. I think that's the highest. I think that's one of the better badges or descriptions you could earn as a political YouTuber. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So our talk today primarily is going to be about open borders and vaccinations, more specifically the issue of mandatory vaccines. Let's start with vaccines first because I'm in California, and there's a bill in the California House that would require you to get your vaccines to go to school in California. It's a mandatory vaccination bill. I'm not sure if it will pass or not, but what is your general opinion on vaccines and if they should make them mandatory or not?
I support medical consensus on the efficacy of various vaccines, and I think that they should be mandatory.
Okay. So you do think they should be mandatory. I agree with you on that. I think that a lot of YouTubers out there would say that we shouldn't force someone to do something they don't want to do. What's your take on that?
I think that I understand where they're coming from there as a principle, but in the case of vaccines, it's really a public health matter. It's where like people often, pretty much everyone agrees, even like libertarians agree with this too, that your individual rights and autonomy end when you start impacting somebody else, right? When you start harming somebody else. And when you don't get vaccinated, you're potentially harming a lot of people because whatever disease you have can spread. And so it's a public health issue. And this is where individual rights, in my estimation, are overridden by, the good of the public and the health of other people. Because when you don't get vaccinated, there's a negative externality there. And that's that you can spread the disease you have to other people. And I think that it's only reasonable that when you look, well, I guess when we look at this particular bill, that the public schools say, if you don't want to get vaccinated, fine, I guess, but you aren't allowed access to us. You aren't allowed in our space because you're going to contaminate us and you're going to get us sick. So, yeah, I think this bill is a good bill, although I would go much further to just make mandatory vaccination.
I I agree with everything you've said. So there's no disagreement there. How much further would you go? Some people have said we shouldn't allow you to get a passport. We should think about taking away driver's licenses. What's your opinion on that? And what are the vaccine laws in Canada? I'm assuming they're somewhat similar to the US.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, like the public policy around vaccines in Canada, but I think it's a similar status to the United States. We don't have mandatory vaccination here. I'm not sure about the rules of like what you can and can't do if you're not vaccinated. I just simply don't know. I have to plead ignorance on that point. But my ideal policy would be, yeah, you're not allowed to, go to public schools. You're not allowed in, various, yeah, kids can't go to school unless they're vaccinated. And also, I would agree with, yeah, taking away their passport because, um, because other countries obviously don't want to be bringing people in who aren't vaccinated. They don't want people traveling there if they, are carrying some dangerous infectious disease. So, but they can't really tell whether a person has it or not because you can't do like a full medical exam on everybody who's coming across the border. So I think countries should just do the decent thing and revoke people's passports who aren't vaccinated. So I would agree with that. Ideally, I would just, if there was a way to just enforce mandatory vaccination, like I would say, like fine people for not doing it, like how in Australia they fine people for not voting, and lo and behold, a shit ton of people vote. I
Mm.
think that they should fine people because most anti-vaxxers, save for maybe I don't know what's that lady's name, like Jim Carrey's ex, that
Yeah,
prominent lady, like yeah, what's her name, Jenny McCarthy or
Jenny
something.
McCarthy.
Yeah, save for like rich weirdos like that, like weird rich hippies like that. Your average anti-vaxxer will not be able to afford the kind of fine I would impose, and I would impose a fine something to the tune of probably like $10,000, and most people can't take that,
Yeah,
blow.
yeah, and the biggest problem with the vaccine debate, in my opinion, is a mix of cognitive bias and parents of autistic children want a scapegoat. They want some reason why their child ended up the way they did. And according to medical science, it's not vaccines that are the problem. Oftentimes, it's related to the health of the parents.
Right, yeah, because it is true. There are a lot of this stuff is coming from parents who are claiming that their autistic kid got autism from vaccines, right? Like it's not just like people with no relation to autistic people claiming this. You're right, a lot of it does stem from these like parents of autistic kids, and people automatically trust them more because like, oh, they're the parents dealing with the autism, we need to listen to their story and all that garbage. But you're right though, yeah, I think that a lot of it stems from those feelings, like they don't want to fess up to the fact that their child might have autism because of something they did, or that it might just be a genetic thing. Your kid might just
Yeah.
have a problem and they don't want to deal with that. It's easier to blame other people for your faults than it is to blame yourself.
Yeah. Are you aware of the Scientific American article that states for every year, pretty much over the age of 25, that when a woman gives childbirth every single year over the age of 25, autism goes up by about 5%, the risk of autism?
I didn't see that specific article, but I have heard the warnings put forward by various medical professionals that having children later increases the likelihood that your child will have a lot of problems. One of the big ones being autism.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing because a lot of families want to wait until they're older and more financially stable to have children, but the science shows, at this time at least, that if you are waiting to have children, the chances are that your children will not be as healthy as they could potentially
Yeah,
be if you
yeah,
had them.
we're probably having children too late. And a lot of people take offense when you say that because they want to have children late. But I think it's just a fact that as a society, North Americans and Europeans and I guess now Asians as well are having children too late. That you should be having children in your early 20s. That's what we used to do, and lo and behold, rates of things like autism were much lower back then.
Yep.
And yeah, we're having children too late. I mean, of course, it's natural. Women can have children until they're like in their mid 50s, and men can have children forever, really, except, you know, the quality. I mean, I don't want to sound harsh, but certain qualities of the child are at risk of degradation if you put it off that long.
Yeah, sperm quality and egg quality both go down as a person gets older. I don't think that's very controversial.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, I mean, of course, these are averages. I mean, the funny thing is, even though it's better to have kids young, most of the, let's say, high human capital people I know have parents who have them relatively late, right? Because right now the kinds of people in North America that have kids really young tend to have them by accident, and you know that
Yeah,
tends to be the story of how they had them. So these are averages, and it certainly doesn't mean that you can judge people based on when their parents had them. Because, like I said, some of the highest human capital people I've ever met, like, you know, the best kids at my school, the smartest kids at my school, some of their parents were like 40 when they had them. Um, so yeah, it's important to remember not to judge individuals based on this stuff. But as a broad societal thing, we are probably having kids too late, and it's interesting because we wonder why. Parents wonder why their kids are having trouble socializing. It might be because we have more people than ever on the autism spectrum. Like, I wouldn't even be so confident as to not put myself somewhere on the spectrum. I don't know. I know it's a very, very broad spectrum, and
yeah.
I don't think I'm an amazing socializer, and I've had other people say that to me. They're like, "Look, I'm not diagnosed autism or whatever, but I mean, I've always had a sort of weird time socializing. I mean, you know, in a way that I didn't think people did 50 years ago. So who
And
knows?"
there also is, I've seen articles that tie high functioning autism or Asperger's to intelligence as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you saw the Elon Musk episode on Joe Rogan, but after that, a lot of people suspect Elon Musk might be on the spectrum because of that.
Yeah, I didn't watch the whole thing. I mean, I may be like the one online person who didn't watch the whole thing. I saw a couple clips, but yeah, it's possible Elon Musk is. I think you're right. There is reason to believe that um, that high functioning autism and intelligence are linked. I mean, most people with Asperger's that I've known, Asperger's being a mild strain um, of autism, are quite smart, right? Like
Yep.
they tend to be smart, right? Now they're not socially smart. They, you know, sometimes they'll make fools of themselves, but and or not get social cues and stuff. But just in terms of IQ, I imagine they rank fairly highly. Like, we're talking probably above 110 for most of them.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So it's something interesting to think about. Is there anything else you want to add on this topic before we transfer over to open borders?
Um, I don't know if there's anything else I personally want to add on this note. This was an interesting subject, though. It's something I've never talked about anything like this on my channel, but it's but it is pretty cool stuff, and it's stuff I do think about. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and it's only going to get more interesting in the future as CRISPR, the genetic modification technology we have now, as that becomes more common use, and as stem cells become more common use. I've read reports. I don't know if it's true or not, but injecting stem cells into someone's brain could have positive effects. Modifying genetic code could possibly cure autism. So I don't think this line of argument or this discussion is going away anytime soon.
So if those things could cure autism, though, wouldn't you risk impacting other things if you were to start editing their genes, especially if is there a single autism gene, or I would imagine it's a combination of.
Yes,
I
sir.
would imagine,
It's a
yeah,
combination. You're right. Yeah.
yeah, because it's not autism isn't like a disease. It's just a word we use to describe people who socialize poorly. So I would be, even if I was like, say, like some billionaire parent having a kid or just had a kid and want to, you know, get rid of their autism or whatever, make them less autistic, I would be wary of going that route, because I think you need to change a lot of things. And I think there's a lot that can possibly go wrong, especially when you consider, that different genes are also linked to other genes. And yeah, I
Yeah.
would be careful about going that route in general. My general stance on that kind of stuff, the gene editing CRISPR stuff, is that it should only be used to prevent serious diseases that are clearly identifiable, that we can identify the genes for, and would be worth any potential downsides. Like, I would guess that the autism intelligence thing isn't a matter of the genes being linked. I would imagine that's just smarter people struggle to socialize with the general public, and that kind of contributes to them being, and that's a factor contributing to them being deemed autistic. Or maybe they have certain interests that are strange, or they're obsessive about certain things that are unpopular among broad swaths of people, and that contributes to their identification as autistic. But I'm not an expert on this. There might be some kind of genetic link. So, I mean, just for example, if there was a genetic link, and again, I shouldn't even really be talking about this as a layman who doesn't know an answer. I'm sure there's an easy answer out there to this, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Evan, but it would be pretty bad if, just hypothetically, the genes that create autism are inextricably linked to genes that determine intelligence, right? Because then if you cure your kid's autism, you're going to make them dumber. But I don't think
Yeah, it
that's
has
the
a
case.
reverse effect. You're trying to help your kid, and
Yeah. No, I don't. I think it's a matter of, correlation here, as opposed to causation, like genetic causation. I think it's a correlation thing, but I know there's lots of other things that are linked in a genetically causal way, and that's where there's concern of, the impacts it could have. Also, like, some people would strive for things that are kind of, I think a lot of parents, if we did go down this road of genetic editing, would select for, frankly, the wrong things. And I mean, just hang with me here. People always talk about, like, how good will it be to make somebody smarter? Well, the smarter one will be hard because there's so many genes go into that, but make them, let's say, taller. There's fewer genes that go into your height.
Yep.
But people don't realize, like, yes, aesthetically, people, men and women, find tallness attractive. All the models are tall, but tall people also don't live as long. And so, should parents really be deciding, and many will, to shorten their child's lifespan because they want them to look a certain way? It's interesting because there's a lot of people that are against circumcision, but are for this, like, for parents editing their kids in all these kinds of aesthetic ways. So I think a lot of people have an inconsistency there, but it's a complicated debate. Like, how much power should parents have over their children, and how can we ensure they use that responsibly?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. As to circumcision, I feel like circumcising your kid doesn't give them any real benefits, but making your kid tall, that there is a game theory aspect to, yeah, you're shortening their life, but being taller makes you more sexually attractive to women, for example. And so you could make an argument that they are a little bit different, but I take your point and I agree with you.
Well, I would think in this analogy, I don't want to talk, about dicks too much, but I think it's a pretty comparable analogy because, it's a height will have pros and cons. You'll shorten a lifespan, but you might have, better performance with the opposite sex and stuff. But it's similar to that with circumcision, right? Like, people say parents shouldn't be able to decide that, but they do anyway. And, they'll cite different kind of pros and cons, and there are pros. Like, if you look at the medical journals, they say, like, your risk of
HIV.
like, it's better for HIV. Yeah, it's better for HIV, which might explain why HIV has always been a lot more prominent in Africa than the Middle East. Although in Africa, it's also, like, multiple people, like polygamy and stuff, contributing to that. But yeah, so like HIV, some urinary tract infections, some other diseases. I think there are health benefits to it, but the downsides are that like I guess the downsides are that when you're actually doing it on a kid, like I'd be afraid of doing that on a baby, right? Like this,
Yeah.
and and then there's all the debates around like whether it's better to be circumcised or not sexually. And honestly, I've only ever been one way, so I can't say.
Yeah, I just have a problem with the idea that, oh, we should circumcise to lower an insignificantly small chance of you getting HIV to begin with. Why don't we take the appendix out of every baby or every 5-year-old when on their 5th birthday, because sometimes appendixes burst. I feel like
Well,
the the material effect gain that you get is not worth the number of babies that die. Not even to mention the fact that it's an involuntary cosmetic
I
action.
think
But
yeah, I think
I do want to say though, I do agree that I do think it's hypocritical that people who are against circumcision would be pro CRISPR use, and they
yeah,
don't see a. I think you're dead on about
yeah,
that.
because it's very similar. It's a very similar. I think it's a very good analogy. Like you say so myself, because it's a high. It's a there's risk in the procedure. Something can go wrong, and when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like in a case of circumcision, like there's this guy I know that was circumcised, and he's had problems where he's like, I'm not gonna always say his name, but he was like bleeding out his dick and stuff because it went wrong, and it's
Oof.
like, yeah, he had a botched circumcision, which was pretty terrible. So there's, I mean, although that's very rare as well. Like similarly, like getting HIV in North America is rare for an uncircumcised guy, but to be fair, bleeding out is rare for a circumcised guy as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a situation where there's risk involved. There's kind of pros and cons that parents might not be entirely privy to, and also it's the parent making the decision for the kid, right? So now I guess the one difference is that with gene editing, I don't know, how can you gene edit like in like an existing person, or do you have to do it like really close to the inception and not an
So
expert on this?
we need to throw all the cards out on the table. It's still a relatively new technology, so it's not in mass use. But from what I've read, China has done gene edits in stage 4 cancer patients. So it has been done in live patients, but I don't know the effects because it was done in stage 4 cancer patients. And I believe that they lived a little bit longer because of it, but ultimately, I believe all the patients died.
Wow, yeah. So yeah, it's not a so yeah, you don't want to do it on existing people.
What I think is a weird but interesting story is a Chinese scientist that came out a few months ago and said that the government of China is already using CRISPR in vitro on fertilized eggs. And he said that I'll try to link the news story after this. I'll send it to you. But he said that there are 2 twin girls that were born, and they're the first unofficial CRISPR babies. But again, the government of China officially denied what the scientist said and discredited him, so we need to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff right now is coming out of China, um, which is interesting because I think some of the stuff associated with this um, wouldn't jive with American morality, and so a lot of it's coming from China or originating there.
Yeah. China, I don't want to say China has, I would say China has a different set of ethics than America does. And with regards to genetic mutations and CRISPR, I'm not sure whose set of ethics system is better if you take game theory into account. But
Yeah,
on that, let's start to transition to open borders. for the sake of this argument, I'd like to define what open borders are, just so we're on the same page.
Okay.
Open borders, according to me, is the ability to travel to any country you want to and work and live there. You do not qualify for citizenship and you do not qualify for government assistance, but you can leave the country you're in now, and you can travel to any country and work/live there.
But you can have kids who will be there who will be citizens.
That's something we can talk about as well. Some people say that the kids would not be eligible.
Oh yeah. So that would be an important piece for me. But yeah, so what you're describing there, you're basically saying the whole world should become like the EU.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. So what are your initial thoughts on that? And then I'll say what my initial thoughts are.
I get the I think I get the economic arguments for open borders. Like globally, big picture, I think it probably would be good for the global economy to have open borders. The best people for, each job everywhere can get the best person or something closer to it they can currently get. Having people closer together is more economical than having them further apart. I get the the arguments for increasing global GDP with open borders. Generally speaking, my initial gut reaction to Americans advocating open borders is negative, because they're always asking basically for to do it like unilaterally. So whenever people talk about their country and open borders, all these American liberals are, some of them are increasingly actually pro open borders. Like, you can just look at the responses to Bernie Sanders opposing it to see what I'm talking about. And I view that as crazy. I think if you had open borders, it would have to be a global thing, because one country can't just decide we don't have borders, because that country's gonna get screwed. Like, everybody is going to basically, like, it's going to be terrible for the people of that country. It's going to destroy their wages. You're going to have like huge flows of people to just that country. You're going to have massive overpopulation. Like, it would be a disaster for like one country to decide to have open borders. So it would have to be like every country agrees on it. And practically speaking, I don't think that would ever happen. I think that people are tribal. People have an in-group preference. People are nationalistic. I think that you do have to kind of, in order to make globalization and everything work, you do have to find ways to actually tamper people's inherent nationalism, which I think we tried to do and failed to do, frankly, and are now starting to fail to do. And I don't know if you can or even should try to override it personally. So I think it's a very impractical thing. And I think that efforts to make it happen, be it on some kind of large scale, or even just on kind of even if it just one country tried to do it or a couple countries tried to do it, I think there'd be a backlash to it that I think you'd simply get a backlash. Inevitably, it would be undone. Like, the EU probably won't survive this century. I'm quite confident it won't. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, you're just going to create backlash. You're going to create nationalism. You're just going to risk conflict with this stuff. Like, my mentality when it comes to like a lot of this borders immigration stuff is, we know people have never really liked immigration, so just don't poke the bear, because the backlash is going to be ugly and not worth it, frankly. And so that'd be like the thing with open borders. Like, maybe there's an argument for it, but actually, I think there might be some, but I don't think it would be politically viable or worth pursuing. I think somebody might be pounding on the door, so I'm gonna have to go for just a minute. I'll be back.
Sounds good. We'll wait. In the meantime, I'd like everyone to know I have a podcast. I have a podcast by the name of Political Singularity. And I also have a website. It's www.politicalsingularity.com. I'm doing some renovations on it right now, but the website should be live by the end of tonight, possibly early tomorrow. I'm changing a few things, but again, it's politicalsingularity.com. And we talk about a lot of issues similar to what we're talking about now. Are you
Or
back? Are you back,
yeah,
Scott?
I'm back.
Beautiful. So I agree with a lot of what you said. I'm honestly torn on the issue. I consider myself kind of weird when I look at the future because I don't look 5, 10, or even 20 years ahead. I look like 100 or 400 years from now. And that's pretty much unheard of, at least in the current day in the Western countries, at least. Countries like China tend to look hundreds of years ahead just because of how old their
Yeah,
history is. But Western countries, are, especially the US, we're so new, we don't have that frame of mind.
and
And
it's a massive disadvantage that you
exact,
don't.
exactly. And so from that point of view, I sit in my bed and I think at night, like, what would happen? What would humanity be in 400 years if we just had open borders? Yeah, there's going to be problems, but do you know what? We're going to have problems no matter what. Yeah, it will probably be more problematic than if we didn't in the short term. And it might even lower the quality. It would definitely lower the wages and possibly the quality of life for people in our countries, United States and Canada, at least for 5 to 10 years, if not for 50 to 100 years. But 400 years from now, we'll both be dead unless, CRISPR has some crazy stuff come out. I'm crossing my fingers. But we'll both be dead. But what will humanity be like if we did open borders? And so, from a human progress, from a species level examination, even if it was a unilateral opening of borders, I think it would be bad for a lot of people alive today in the US, but I think it might be the single greatest thing citizens of the US could do for humanity.
Why would it be the best thing they could do for humanity? Because you're confident other countries would start doing so too. And but if you opened all these borders, why would that be the best thing that could happen to humanity though? Like,
So,
um,
conservative estimates say that if we opened the borders just for the US and allowed anyone to come in, it would double our GDP. Now, again, let's take
well,
that with a grain of
what about
salt.
per capita? What would it have do to the GDP per capita though?
Exactly, and that's something to talk about. The GDP per capita would probably go down. I'm talking about the overall economy, and that's not a good representation
Yeah,
of
because
the average person, but it's something I'd like to note because I'm looking at it as more of a macro scale than a micro, but I will concede the micro and the GDP per capita would go down, but the macro scale, the US would become more competitive. We would get the super geniuses from India, China, wherever. We would have the best human
they could
capital.
already go to the U.S. though. They could already go. Frankly, if Trump actually passed the Raise Act, they'd be able to go to America anyway. You could get all like the super geniuses, as you put it. Although I question the ethics of robbing those countries of those people. Actually, in the case of China, I'd be for it to undermine their expansion. Um, but you already could do that. Like Canada already basically does that. Canada and Australia with our immigration systems, we basically just take highly educated people from places like India and China, um, and
Yeah,
so
but
I
there's always going to be if you're not always going to get everyone because I'll speak to the US. From my understanding, H1Bs are not as easy to get as some people claim they are. And not only that, okay, even if we take the super geniuses, there's still the regular people who are average and above average IQ that can help our economy, and
why
they
would
would.
you? But that
Oh,
this sounds like a nationalistic Like this sounds like an American kind of nationalist argument, though. Like you seem to be. You're talking earlier about how it would be great for humanity, and now you're basically advocating robbing poor countries of their human capital to make America better off.
Well, I would say that those two things seem like they're at odds, but in the long run, if America opened up its borders, it would rob people from other countries, but they're not being used at the level that they could be used in America, for example. And also, they would open their borders in response if they were logical. Perhaps I should say they would open their borders in response, and then it would be the first domino would fall, and then all the dominoes would fall after that. But yeah, I do agree that we'll concede that if America did open its borders, there would be a robbing of intellectual capital from other countries. But at the same time, I
Yeah,
don't think I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think people should ultimately go where they have the best opportunity. And I don't think that just because you were born in India, you
but
need to
you know what,
stay in India.
a lot of these countries though, like, and this is a thing a lot of people like to accept. In a lot of these countries, they're almost more. Some of these countries, not all of them. India still has a kind of a caste thing going on, but some of these countries, like let's say China, for example, in some ways they're more meritocratic than we are, because they test the kids like crazy. They do like what the UK used to do, where they used to like make them do a bunch of testing and then just like put them in the jobs that they're best suited for. Like even if you're from a poor background in China, you'll be put in the public education system, and if you're smart, if you have a high IQ, they use you, right?
Yeah,
Like in some ways, it's more meritocratic than the US, where like there's a lot of high IQ people that become truck drivers. They don't really feel like using their talents, or they can't afford college or whatever, or there's
yeah,
all these things that keep them. Whereas in some of these other countries, like I'm sure in Vietnam, which is still a it's like kind of like China, it's like a quasi communistic country.
yeah.
If you're smart, they'll identify you and give you a role. So I would argue against the idea that that these smart people aren't being put to use in these poor but rapidly growing countries.
I let me clarify even more. Put to use at the level they could be in the U.S. and have a quality of life, most notably make the amount of money that they could make in the United States. So
Why would you want them to make? Why would you want? Why? How is that a utilitarian argument that they would make more money in the U.S. so they should be in the U.S.? Like, one, while they might make less in raw terms in the other countries, they'll their standard of living might still be similar because stuff is cheap there, but and they'll have higher status and stuff that could have a nicer life in some of those regards. But the thing is, if they're in those countries, though, they're helping the other people in those countries,
yeah,
right? So they're like in the U.S., like let's say let's say just like some Indian guy with this like a really smart Indian guy in India could become like a really important, could be identified. And India is not super meritocratic, so it's not a great example, but let's say a country like that could be identified and put into a higher ranking position where he's like doing a lot to develop that country. Whereas in America, he just comes here and becomes like a middle class software engineer or whatever,
yeah.
Like I argue that he's doing like more good in America than he'd be doing in that other country, considering all the people that are in that country that still need to be lifted up.
Yeah, that's a great point. But let's say all countries open their borders and the flow of labor isn't just going to the U.S. You can go anywhere you
Yeah, but
want.
it's not going to flow the other way. Like it's already super. Like if I wanted to move to the Philippines, I could move there tomorrow, but I won't because it sucks. And people from the Philippines move to Canada, right? So it wouldn't be going both ways. You just have like this big. What you basically have is the smarter people, because you said that in open borders you don't get access to government services. So you'd have the smarter people all coming to select countries like the Anglosphere and parts of Europe and maybe parts of Asia, although Japan would never open their borders. Those Asian countries weren't there.
Yeah,
Yeah, they have way too high of an in-group preference, it seems. Um, they you would have a situation where basically you'd have this like hundreds of millions, billions of poor, destitute people, not really going anywhere in like huge chunks of the world. And you just have you'd have basically an exacerbation of global inequality, I think.
Let's touch on the poor people in, for example, the Philippines or in some of these island nations off of the U.S., like the Dominican Republic. If you're born poor in the Dominican Republic, I think it's safe to say you're pretty much kind of screwed. Even if you're a generally intelligent person, the systems are not in place, at least at the level that they are in the US, that makes it meritocratic enough to succeed. So if you
But
came,
not
go
every
ahead.
country's, but there's other countries that are more meritocratic though. Like the thing is, and sure, yeah, are there people there that won't be able to use their talents in some of these countries? Absolutely. But if those countries are ever going to change, unless we have some kind of global government, there's going to need to be smart people there to form a competent elite. Like you can look at lots of other poor countries, like South Korea. Like South Korea in the 50s was the poorest country in the UN, and it would still be there today if it wasn't for basically the smart people there, like Park Chung Hee and various other leaders and innovators and good governors that helped it grow. You wouldn't have expected much would come out of that country, but then now they're in a situation where the smart people can absolutely use their talents there, and it's really quite a wonderful part of the world and the human experience. So I think it is important to not exacerbate global intellectual inequality because you might think these various countries will never be able to people will never be able to use their talents there now, and they'll never get anywhere now. But it's hard to say that for sure, because we have seen success stories like the East Asian tigers, as they're called, in the 20th century, and now increasingly even parts of Africa like Nigeria are starting to grow very rapidly and open these new sectors of their economies and stuff.
So would you say you disagree with the idea that completely open borders would positively affect the economy? Is that the
No, I think it would positive. Well, that's actually a good question, because that's actually a very good and interesting question,
because
because
you
while
make a
the
lot of
I
great points, and I agree with a lot of the stuff you said about robbing
I
companies of
I might
human.
have I might have actually changed my own mind here, which is interesting. I might have actually changed my own mind, because, well, I kind of see the basic kind of classical liberal economic arguments for why global open borders would raise global GDP, but I'm increasingly not sure, because if you take like the smart people who are able to go to the other country, able to go to like North America and thrive without any social services or anything like you're describing, from like these big poor countries, those countries are significantly less likely to have good governance if you basically rob them of a good elite. And and good governance and good government policy and such, and strong institutions are maybe like the predictor of whether of like a country's economic growth, right? um and so yeah, it's possible that if you took like from various countries, like rob them of their like of a potentially good elite, and just rob them of their like intellectual capital with open borders, it's possible that that would actually have a negative impact on GDP, because those countries would have a less competent elite that would pursue bad policies. Frankly, like you get a lot more, like you basically have fewer Singapores and more Zimbabwe's or something. Like you probably wouldn't see these success stories, and you probably would see more political and economic demagoguery and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe these countries would end up with really bad governance and really bad institutions that would hamper their GDP. So maybe you actually wouldn't see an increase in GDP growth. I don't know.
It's an interesting question, and to be honest, I don't think we'll see open borders anytime soon. I think
Oh yeah,
that
no, it'll never happen.
there's a I will give the other side, just to give a complete picture. There is a good argument as well for not allowing very many immigrants in. And I believe, are you familiar with Stefan Molyneux? I don't agree with everything he says, but he breaks down whenever you import H-1Bs, for example, it does reduce the average wage of citizens. What's your thought on that?
Well, yeah, so that I guess is kind of that's kind of another kind of not. It's interesting. You can make Americans can make nationalistic arguments for or against immigration because I think if you're like more like kind of like a neocon, you want America to be big and strong, and so you want it to be bigger. You don't necessarily care about the GDP per capita or the wages as much. And so that argument of like American hegemony and American global strength and everything, yeah, the common sense answer there is you want more. But I think if you look at it more from a perspective of like, defending like an American worker, the argument would probably go more the other way. And it's interesting because you mentioned the H-1B visas. Yeah, it was recently, wasn't there a revelation about how like governments were like how companies were like hoarding these visas and like really manipulating the system to stamp down wages. And I think when you look at a lot of these
Yeah,
H-1B visas are given out for people that are coming to work in tech.
yeah.
And
I
if you
was
look
just
at
about to say it was I believe it was Facebook, Instagram, and Google and Apple colluded together. I think that there's might be a lawsuit as well.
yeah, and because if you look at the wages in tech, or I should say salaries in tech, um, aren't they like 20% lower in real terms than they were in the late 80s? I don't know if it's late 80s or 90s or whatever, but I have seen the number 20% that that tech salaries for employees have gone down quite substantially, and it's probably because of all these H-1B visas.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to do some research. I'm in the tech field, and the salaries are pretty good, but yeah, it's tough when you talk about real wages because most people just look at the nominal wage, and 50,000 or 90,000 today is possibly less than 50,000 in 1970. So that's something that I'll have to research. But you
Yeah.
you bring up good points. And what is your personal opinion on Canada's immigration policy? I see a lot of people on the right, especially on the American right, that just think Canada has lost its mind and that they should be trying to lower their number of H-1Bs. They should try to have less population. They shouldn't take people in that aren't native born Canadians.
Well, so it's interesting because pretty much everyone in Canada, even people on the left, agreed with like they oppose our temporary foreign worker program, which is interesting because there's people that will oppose that, but they'll never ever question like legal, like, proper immigration numbers, um, which I don't really understand. It's like a massive inconsistency, but people are dumb, so whatever. But yeah, as for my personal opinion on it, so Canada has a very high immigration, like basically one of the highest rates in the world. I think only Australia is higher. We take about 1% of the population in additionally each year, and so this is about 330,000 at the moment. I think is where we're heading, or for the next year. All the major parties support this, the exception of the People's Party, started by Maxime Bernier, which I don't really consider to be a major party. They only pull like a few percentage points. Honestly, honest to God, I would like it to be lowered substantially because, look, I know there's lots of other factors going into housing prices, but it's clearly driving up the price of homes to have so many new buyers every year in various cities like Vancouver and Toronto. I mean, it's not making the houses cheaper. It's certainly going to be having an upward impact, which I don't like. I also like people say, oh, Canada's is good because it's only skilled people. So like the working class have it a bit easier. But like, what about the middle class?
Yeah.
Like, what about the middle class? What about the upper middle class even? What about the extremely productive and overtaxed upper middle class? What about them? Don't they matter? Should they? And they're already some of those stressed out people on the planet. Should they have to live with even more stress and insecurity in their life? Like, we have to think about them as well. And so, like, honest to God, let's be honest. Like, we have a situation right now where like everybody, I don't know, where there's just so much economic. And it's funny because people say economic anxiety in reference to like Trump voters and stuff, but no, literally economic insecurity and anxiety. Like people don't know if they can build a future for themselves. And I think the only way we can finally do this is if we frankly can strangle the labor pool a bit. Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of these people, a lot of these like same like neoliberal technocrat types who say we need more immigration are the same people that are like automation will wipe out 90% of jobs in the next 10 years, which I personally think is nonsense. But I think they're nonsense on both these points, but it's funny. Like people are always telling us like how automation will wipe out all these jobs. And they're also saying, oh yeah, also Canada needs to bring in 1 million immigrants a year. Like Canada needs 1 million new workers a year. And also 90% of the jobs can be gone in 10 years. It's totally incoherent. I think that automation will remove the raw number of I think it will reduce the raw number of jobs needed to do stuff, obviously. And so I think we will see the number of jobs go down. And so not only are we going to see jobs disappear, I don't know what percentage it will realistically be in my lifetime. I don't know what percentage of people are going to be made NEETs or whatever. I don't know that number. I don't know if anyone really does. These things are notoriously hard to predict, and there's so much disagreement among economists. But let's go with the assumption, which is a very reasonable one, that we're going to lose a bunch of jobs based on automation. So that on top of the fact that salaries are already too low, housing prices are already too high, life is already too expensive for Canadians, and throw in the fact too that the vast majority of the people we're bringing in are like wealthy people that would be living good lives in their other countries anyway. I want the number lowered.
Yeah, I think you have some good points on that, and yeah, personally, I'm excited for automation. I think that it's going to be great in the long run. I think that it will move humanity forward, and I think it will come with problems. I think that if you do any research on the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s and late 1800s, early 1900s, there were mass riots. We created the 40-hour work week because of that, I believe. Andrew Yang talks about this a lot, and I think that in general, automation will increase efficiency. We're already seeing it in cancer detection, and I think it will put a lot of people out of jobs, but it will help those who are intellectually, what's the word I want to use? It will help the intellectual elites, but it will come at the expense of the lower and average IQ people. I think that we're segmenting. I think we've already segmented along the lines of IQ. I think that if you trace IQ to the class system in the United States, it's a pretty straight correlation. If you don't,
right. So there's a lot there I want to comment on. I know before this we said we weren't really going to talk about AI because I don't know enough about the details of AI itself. But if we're talking about like the politics and societal impacts of automation, so when it came to the Industrial Revolution, I don't think that entailed the level of dislocation that this potentially could, because if you look at the Industrial Revolution, it was basically an economic explosion just based on greater efficiency and a new industrial model. But some people had to change jobs. They went from being like, agricultural workers to being industrial workers and the like. Or in some cases, like, new sectors were born and they had to create, they had to change. But that was a situation where like people still had jobs, and the economic well-being of the average person went up substantially. And yeah, you're right, we introduced the 40-hour work week, so people worked less. We spread out the work a little bit more as there was less to do to produce the amount that we need to produce. But I don't think that this could be, I think this would be a lot worse than the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution didn't actually take end up taking the jobs of many people. And it also wasn't a total devaluing of humanity. Like, I think this is going to be like the invention of like the steam engine and the cotton gin aren't going to devalue humanity like self-driving cars will, say, and stuff like that. Like, when the technology can manage itself and no longer becomes a tool or thing to be managed by the humans, that is, I think, like a direct threat to humanity, right? Like, I understand the efficiency stuff, and, you know, I'm not even really against automation when it comes to like better machinery, and even self-driving cars, I think, could save a lot of people's lives. Although I'm very, very concerned about the potential economic dislocation that self-driving cars and stuff like that would have.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it's different than the Industrial Revolution, because that was a situation where the average person was clearly made better off, and there were kind of like more jobs, and, like, you know, new jobs and more dynamic jobs, and I don't really see that happening here as much, unless, you know, people always say, oh, there'll be people who will store the robots and fix the robots. And yeah, sure. But like you said, those people will probably be, in the case of most of them, those will be like high IQ people.
Yeah.
And most people will be screwed by this. Whereas in the Industrial Revolution, basically most people went from, you know, just a shitty factory job. No, it wasn't. Most people went from like a shitty manufacturing job to a less shitty manufacturing job at the end of it. Whereas now it's potentially, unless we just decide to like really spread the work thin, like go to like a 20-hour work week and just spread it out that way, I think we could have a very bad situation where we have like a few people that have very good jobs, kind of an elite, who are doing well, and who are like, you know, like, and, you know, who are doing all this crazy stuff, interacting with AI and stuff, and a bunch of other people who are like screwed. You're potentially going to see a huge exacerbation of inequality. And people always say like, oh, we can solve this because we'll use like the CRISPR to make all the dumb people, we'll make everyone equal with the CRISPR. That's ridiculous. Like, no elite in history has ever consciously decided to make everybody equal, to make people equal to them. Even the communist leaders that loved equality, you know, they wanted equality. They didn't want equality for themselves. They want to be the people at the top. No people would threaten their own power that way. It's a ridiculous notion that they would just spend all this money to give out free gene editing to everybody. If anything, they would just hoard the resource and jack up the price, so they're the only ones that could use it. So I see this as being potentially, unless it's stopped or managed very well, a massive exacerbation of inequality, and frankly a disaster for a lot of people.
I completely agree, and I would say that as to what you said about the 20-hour work week, I see the 20-hour work week as a necessity. I think that
I agree.
And I would even go as far to say we should stop taxing people based on income and start taxing people based on net worth, and try to start incentivizing the people at the top to retire earlier so that their job opens up to someone lower on the totem pole.
True, yeah. And my perspective here is we'll kind of have to see how it goes as well, because, you know, it is hard to predict the future. It is entirely possible that, you know, while manufacturing jobs are reduced, it's possible that service jobs and other jobs are maintained. It's possible. Like, again, it's possible, right? Like, I worked at a grocery store that had really great state-of-the-art self-serve checkouts. They're super easy to use. Just move your arm a few times. You don't have to deal with anyone. You don't have to wait in line, and you're out of there. And part of the reason you never had to wait in line is because people would always use the human ones, right? Like, I would be the only cashier on the one time, and I'm like, guys, we have self-serve check. I'm saying this in my head, guys, we have self-serve checkouts. Like, stop making a massive line here and make me work my ass off, right?
Yeah,
we have self-serves over there, and they'd still gravitate towards the human. So it's possible that some sectors don't end up affected just based on, demand theory of value, just based on the way demand shapes things, human demand for what we prefer. But it's also possible it goes bad. It's possible, like people say, new sectors of the economy open up. Like nobody would have predicted. There's new sectors of the economy that exist today that people wouldn't have predicted 300 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So that could happen. I mean, we're assuming that we have a perfect ability to predict the future, which we don't really. But yeah, I think this potentially could be quite bad. And I don't really know exactly what to do about it. Like I'm a person who believes that we should like normalize banning. Like I take kind of a Lee Kuan Yew approach to stuff. If something's bad and isn't pervasive in the society yet, get out in front of it and maybe ban it if it's going to be a subversive element.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm open to the possibility of doing that. Then people say the argument against banning certain things or banning certain technologies. And to be clear, there's some technologies that are very good. Like I don't know that I'd want to ban self-driving cars, which aren't even really a wide-scale thing yet, because I think they could be good. But there's things that currently exist that I would ban. Like I'm seriously starting to think that social media, or would consider banning. Like I'm seriously starting to think that social media is a bad thing for society. And I'm not just one of those people who are like, oh, the Russians will manipulate it, but I'm starting to think it's having a bad impact on our social relations and on productivity and on a whole host of other matters, and certainly on our politics.
It definitely has, and there's studies that show if you are on Facebook for an hour a day, your chance of depression goes up by X amount.
Yeah. So this argument that technology is always good, I think, is disproved by some of the technology that currently exists. Now, there are future advancements in technology that I think I would support and would be good and would be kind of a continuation of like the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, of that similar kind of spirit, like, innovations like that. Then there's this other stuff that I think potentially could have calamitous societal effects. Now, people say the argument against banning stuff is that you're just one country or even a collection of countries that decides to ban something, which we have done. We did with like aerosols and stuff, although that's a very small thing. The argument against that, they say, is like, well, China's not going to ban it. And to which you could say, okay, then maybe you can like embargo China, force their hand to do it or whatever. But let's say, ultimately it's up to them. So they say you'll lose your you'll lose your edge. You'll lose your edge over these other countries. But then I guess we just return to a conversation about whether we want to have like these big hegemonic powers and whether we want, whether we want these kinds of global competitions or whether we want to just have a very kind of base sort of like societal nationalism almost, where like we have different countries that provide people different experiences. Like there could be one country that, through various policy mechanisms basically creates the society of the 1990s. Personally, that's one I'd like to live in. Maybe you'll have another one that recreates the 50s for all the trads. Maybe you'll have one that's like a rural society for all the more hardcore trads. Maybe you'd have one that is some kind of like techno dystopia, in my opinion, but that the techno fetishists would love, right? Like that those kinds of people would love. I think they call themselves cyber nihilists or whatever. So maybe we could create different kinds of societies in different countries, and if we could all kind of come to that understanding, maybe we'd stop trying to like conquer and infringe on each other and exploit each other, and kind of just peacefully coexist with each other. And some would have more tech and others would not. And if we had the norm that we don't invade people anymore, which, is a hard thing to overcome because we've always had kind of a desire for conquest in our blood. But maybe if we could somehow make ourselves more peaceful people, we could come to some kind of agreement that, we could have some kind of like productive or healthy nationalism that is about providing different experiences in different countries, and where we maintain uniqueness of places and where people have real choice about where they want to live. And maybe that's where we get back to some of those arguments about open borders. You might need some kind of open borders or mass population, global population exchange in order to get the people to these different countries who want to be in these different unique countries in the first place. But yeah, it brings about interesting conversations about, what kind of societies we want to have and how we can create those or maintain those. So I honestly don't think that we're being creative enough currently. Like, there's all these arguments, like, it seems like even now, like a lot of libertarian arguments. Now, you mentioned Molyneux, and you did preface just that you disagree with him on several things. So yeah, but you mentioned him, and like, so I take it you're libertarian sympathetic maybe, but it seems like a lot of libertarian arguments are bleeding into like other political movements now, where it's always like, you can never regulate anything, you can never ban anything, you can never try to steer anything. It's wrong, it's immoral, especially in the social realm. Like liberals and many so-called conservatives seem to agree with the libertarians, but I think we need to start being a little bit more open-minded in how we can create the kinds of societies we actually want to live in.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in no way someone who says that we cannot regulate. I actually have debated a few people on a free market. I personally don't believe that a free market exists in America. I think we do regulate, and I think that certain markets need to be regulated, specifically pollution. But Scotch, I want to be mindful of your time. How is it looking?
So I mean, honestly, I'm just kind of hanging out. I have to go at around. I'll have to go for sure at around 9. Frankly, I don't know when I'm eating dinner, but I'll need to get ready for something. Start getting ready for something at about 9. So
Okay.
if you wanted to talk for like another 20 minutes or whatever, that
Sounds good. Yeah, I just
that's
didn't
fine.
want to get into a whole thing and have you, trying to. Cool. Yeah, I Molyneux, he's an interesting case. I actually debated him about a
Oh,
year and
really?
a half ago. Yeah, on climate change, and unfortunately, I was kind of naive at the time. He's like, yeah, I'll post it, and he never posted it. But the whole debate was over his. At the time, he was a climate skeptic, to put it nicely, and he had
Yeah.
on a lot of people that were not qualified, in my opinion, and they were hating on climate change scientists, to put it easily. And we had a debate, and he wasn't very educated on the permafrost. He wasn't very educated on uh, the uh, the mass extinction, the last great Permian extinction, and how it was caused by the permafrost, which is now melting, by the way, because of climate change. He, but I will give him credit. It was a very good conversation. It was very civil, but I wish he would have posted it. And it kind of his rebuttal to me was that the solution to climate change is people just need to act on an individual level and have less kids and introduce.
Have less kids.
Yeah.
That's funny because he's all about having kids, right?
Yeah. So, and again, I don't want to.
That's probably why he didn't post it. It's probably because he ended up taking a position or a few positions that are totally at odds with his other stuff, and that would piss off his audience.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on Molyneux? I know he's in a lot of hot water now because of his race and IQ stuff, his climate change denial, but I also have to give him credit where credit's due. He's 100% right on free speech. 100% right.
Oh,
Um,
of course. Now, that's not a hard thing to be right on, frankly. But like, to me, that's like a basic thing that you need to even really be able to have decent conversations. But yeah, sorry, carry on. I think you were still talking.
Yeah, I agree. It's easy, but there are people that do not believe in free speech. And something we can maybe talk about is why they don't believe in free speech. But yeah, in general, he does support free speech, which I agree with him on. Some other positions he has around regulation, I think, are a little bit naive. Which in our debate, he literally said to me, if a chemical company pollutes a river, the people can sue after they get sick. And I said, Stefan, you're going to get cancer and die. And he said, "Oh well, the families can sue." Well,
Yeah.
that's a reactionary. Your arguments are reactionary, whereas regulation can sometimes look forward in time, and
It's
so
preventative. It
exactly.
prevents problems. Yeah.
And so the idea that every single problem that could come across would be solved in common law, and big corporations wouldn't hire lawyers to, they already hire lawyers to drag out court cases forever. And I believe the idea that reputation and common law court cases, reactionary reactionary common law court cases, would solve the problem of regulation. No, I that's something that I think is a little bit preposterous. But I think that in that sense, Stefan is an ideologue where he drinks the Kool-Aid, and I have respect for him. I have respect for everyone, but I do think he drank a little bit too much of the anarcho capitalism Kool-Aid on that.
Yeah, because I think you're right that and he's drank so much of the Kool-Aid on that issue. He's so into the anarcho-capitalism. I think it's because it's what he's been, talking about for an hour a day for several years, just for so long. It's I think that's fixed in him now. It's funny because I'm not very familiar with his work, to be entirely honest. The last summer, I listened to maybe 15 episodes of his show or whatever, because I was just curious what he was about, and like many other public thinkers or whatever, I decided to give him a listen and feel out some of his material. And now I did select for his best material, to be clear. So there's a lot of stuff he said that like people rightly take genuine issue with, that I personally didn't really come across and what I listened to. That was simply because I selected for the best material, probably. But yeah, I did notice in what I was listening to that his anarcho-capitalism, his anti-government stuff, actually is now getting in the way of some of his other politics.
Yeah.
Like I think I watched I watched this mock debate he did on capitalism versus Marxism with Lauren Southern, and she did way better than I thought she would, to be honest.
She's smart. I don't
She
agree
is,
with
yeah.
everything. I don't agree with everything she says, but she's very articulate, and I have to give it to her.
Yeah, no, she's a lot of people underestimate her, but she did a very good job in that debate. And I actually thought basically won the debate, although it was kind of annoying because it was supposed to be capitalism versus Marxism, but because capitalism to Molyneux means anarcho-capitalism, they ended up arguing that a lot. And so, oh crap, I forget where I was going with this. But oh yeah, at one point in the debate, she basically said, he was basically the point of arguing for anarchy, and she's like, well, how can we need a state to defend the borders? For both of them, that's like their big issue now, is like the borders and immigration and stuff. Yep. And he's like, well, the wall would have been built a long time ago if like middle class people were able to pool their money and buy the territory along the border and build the wall and stuff like that. Which I forget if she mentioned this, but she might have. I don't know. What I was thinking at the time was that's insane, because you guys are always saying that all the elites, all the rich people, the Kochs, Soros, Murdoch, all these people want open borders. You're admitting that like all the moneyed interests want open borders, and right now, or don't want a wall at least. And right now, they're able to not do that through the government. But if you made it just a matter of just be pooling your money and wealth and property and buying up the territories along the border, don't you think all these like rich people would just do that and then make it permanently impossible to build any kind of wall? Like they totally would. They have more money they have more money sloshing around than some middle class right wing populists do. So it was just funny that even on that point, he couldn't even concede the necessity of the state for just borders or whatever. He was like, oh no, actually it'll be good, we'll just pool our money or something.
Yeah,
which is just ridiculous. Like he's got himself in these like ridiculous situations now because of his anti-statism. And I just want to be clear that I have a ton of problems with the guy. Like frankly, especially on Twitter lately, he's been saying some stuff that's like really vile, frankly. I think he is a smart guy. I'm not going to deny that he's a smart guy. He's clearly very smart, and he has said some very interesting things. And he did do some good videos, especially back in the day. Like he did this one on World War One that was incredible. It was a great video. It's one of my favorite.
The truth about World War One, is that the one you're?
Yeah.
I think I saw that one. I think it was. He's done a he is a smart guy. But as with anyone, I don't agree with him on 100% of the issues. And if you agree, a big problem I have with people today is they'll get someone like Trump, they'll be like, rah, Trump, I love him, everything he does is perfect. No, if you agree with someone on every single issue and there's nothing you ever see wrong with someone, that's a red flag. That's you're the problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I disagree with. There's a lot of people I disagree. You know, there's nobody I agree with entirely. Like there's this one friend I have where we're pretty close, but even in that case, no, we have disagreements. But yeah, it's he's a weird guy. Like I think one thing I take issue with about him and that other people take issue with is as well. And I just thought of this because you mentioned how you spoke to him. I assume that was on his call-in show.
Yes.
He kind of positions himself as an expert on things or as an authority on things or a guide on things that I really don't think he's qualified for. Like he's
a no-nonsense philosopher that only uses logic.
Only ever. But like he almost kind of like he uses his call-in show like he's people's therapist or something. And I mean, yeah, people can give people, you know, I give people advice and you can give life advice without being a qualified psychologist or whatever, but he does get into some like weird psychology, self-help stuff too. Like there's that defooing thing for a while.
Is that where is that where you should leave your family members?
Yeah, if they're left wing or whatever, which is pretty just insane.
if they're left wing or if they're a toxic influence on your life.
Oh no, he's specific. No, he said if they're socialist. Like obviously if they're a toxic influence on your life, yeah, whatever, just leave them. But no, he would say like if they're socialists, which is just anybody that believes in a state, in his opinion. If they're statists, you should leave them because like they want violence against you or something. Like so, yeah, he's pushed a lot of like dumb stuff, like really dumb stuff. Even when he was like better in the past, he would push dumb stuff like that. And there is like embarrassing audio people dig up of him, like kind of griping about his like problems with women and stuff. And so like, I mean, he's an interesting character, but I do worry a bit about how there's a lot of people out there that, and I don't think you're one of them, who treat him like some kind of guru when really he's not. he's not an expert on everything.
Climate change, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's not an expert on everything, let alone an expert on much. And so it's good to have these. It's okay. It's absolutely fine to like explore somebody's content and to even learn from them, so long as you have a critical mind about it. But you have to be
always take it at face value. And I the biggest hit to Stefan, in my opinion, was him not posting the debate that we had. You know, I'm just going to speak for myself. I believe I won the debate, and for him not to post it, I feel like is a little bit disingenuous, especially since it was on his show. That, I mean, he posts almost every single episode. You know, he has thousands of videos. So, and then what really I don't want to say triggered me, but what really triggered me was a week later, he had on some guy from England, Lord Barrington or some crazy name like that. And they talked about climate skepticism, and he mentioned a few things that we had talked about, and I had told him that were not correct, and he cited it again. So in that sense, he's disingenuous, but I also want to extend, I would debate him again, and I do have respect for him. But on that, what is your opinion on, I saw a video, one thing that I do kind of disagree with you on is you made a video about Christopher Hitchens and his comments on left wing hosts, and I agree with you on that. But you made another video on Kyle Kalinske specifically, and although you had a lot of great points, I'd like to kind of discuss that a little bit more, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. What do you want to discuss in particular?
So you let's get, what is your opinion on campaign finance in the US right now? You said in the video, and let me know if I'm wrong, but you said in the video, in short, you don't think campaign contributions have as much effect as people like Kyle and people in TYT think they do. What percentage would you say they have? If we can, I want to see if we have a disagreement or not.
Okay, so TYT suggests that it's probably upwards of 80% of a politician's decision making. Would you agree with that? Like, do they think?
Yeah,
It's probably upwards of 80 in their minds. So for me, I would say the percent to which campaign finance determines a given decision a politician will make is probably it's a good question. It's lower than they think. It would be lower than 80. Like, they talk about it as being this big fact.
Would it be higher than 50? Because I don't think
I would probably place it at maybe like a 45 to 50 kind of around fit, probably it's around half of like a senator's decision making is concerned about campaign finance and getting reelected. I would guess.
Okay, so you're not gonna say it has 0% or 20% or something like that.
No, it's not that low. Maybe 50 is a little high. I might adjust that to 40, although I'd say it's in that realm.
Okay.
It's
then we don't have a significant disagreement.
Yeah.
I would probably put it around 60 to 65%. But I also think you need to look at the specific issue. I think issues like religion or guns, it might be less. But I think, for example, the regulation of the internet and the SOPA, PICPA, and then the FEC chair who had ties to Verizon, I would say maybe that's 80% in that situation, but I would say it's variable depending on the law.
Yeah, I think you're right. It depends on what's being voted on. Like, there's some like just generic stuff where it won't be a factor really, but I would guess it's like the big factors would be campaign finance, the specific needs of somebody's constituency. Like, you could have a super left-wing Democrat on every other issue, but if the jobs in their community rely on a certain sector, they'll vote in accordance with it. I get another one's just like personal ideology of various politicians. Like, there's no real reason for Ben Sasse to be as ridiculously conservative as he is, based on his just based on his campaign donations comparative to other people's, and based on his constituents. He just is super conservative. He voted against like federal funding for the opioid crisis, for fuck's sakes, right? Like, that's clearly just ideological. So there's ideology at play. There's the needs of local constituents. And sometimes there's just politics. Like, what do I think is going to look the best? What is the media going to give me flack or not give me flack for? Right? Like, how can I rack up various endorsements? What will get me votes? Like, sometimes I do just vote in the interests of the voters. But I mean, there's too many other factors perverting that possibility. So
sometimes the majority whip says you should vote this way because the party is voting this way. And what's your view on political parties? And should there's some people like me who say we should, I don't want to say ban political parties, but ban political parties and make everyone run on their own name and run on their own ideology. and not let the voters say, oh, this guy has a R next to his name. No, you're gonna have to do a little bit more research to find out who's the actual. I have family, for example, that will vote straight down the line Republican, and they don't even know who the person is. They just look for the R, and I feel like a substantial amount of the voting population that actually votes does the same thing.
Yeah. So first of all, if you want to get rid of political parties, you would have to ban them because otherwise they'll exist. They're far too efficient. Every democracy has them. Like every country has political parties when it's left up to the politicians' own devices because they're very efficient. They're efficient at organizing, and yeah, it's it's just basic almost political like economic arguments, but for politics why these institutions exist. But so, yeah, you'd have to ban them. But yeah, I like the idea of not having them because then you force people to actually look at the issues and look at the people running. And also, I think political parties, especially only have two of them, really aren't good for people's political psychology. It makes them like way too partisan. The partisanship is negative, and partisanship impacts the way you think about various issues. It makes your political evaluations a lot dumber, frankly. It distracts you from the issues and makes you focus more on the brand. And sure, you can end up voting for the person, but I think it'd be good if people at least did the research on the person because otherwise it's just party brand. I'd rather have people over a vague party because the people are at least associated with some kind of policy agenda or philosophy. Whereas the party in a country so big as the United States, the parties are such big tents anyway that it doesn't necessarily tell you that much about a person when you find out what party they're in. Increasingly it does because there's polarization, but 20 years ago it wouldn't have told you much about a person to know what party they're in. Whereas,
I'm assuming that you would be for repealing first past the post voting system and going to like an alternative runoff voting system.
I'm for proportional representation.
Okay.
Is what I'm for. Yeah. I actually like mixed member proportional representation. That's where that's where you have a local representative, but there's also additional members of parliament added to ensure that the number of votes a party got is in accordance with the number of seats they have. So it's a complicated system. Frankly, I'm just not in the headspace to explain it now because it's hard to explain. It's a bit of a mental workout.
Yeah.
But yeah, that if you want to Google mixed member proportional representation, that's what I favor. And I literally wrote an essay arguing for it a couple years ago, and I think I might just turn that essay into a video. Just read that essay in a video because people ask me this question a lot. So subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for that, I guess.
Sounds good. Now, what's your view on direct democracy, voting directly on the issues? So, for example, instead of in California, when we legalized weed, it went to the ballots and it was a yes, no. Are you in favor of that, or in general?
I'm in favor of ballot initiatives like that. We have virtually none of them in Canada. You guys in the US, especially at the state level, you guys have a lot of them. But yeah, I'm in favor of ballot initiatives. I think it's a good way to actually get things done, like elements of direct democracy like that. But would I replace the U.S. federal government, the U.S. Congress, the Canadian Parliament with direct democracy? I don't think I would, just simply because I think that a lot of the bills being voted on and stuff require a level of reading and research and nuance that the average person isn't going to pursue.
Yeah.
And so I think that could be potentially disastrous. Like, who's going to write the bills, and then what are they going to sneak into the bills if they know that there's a bunch of people who will never read the bills or voting on them?
Yeah. I think that there's definitely downsides with it, but I think it's an interesting idea, especially if it would be a supplement to the system we have. Let's talk a little bit about the average person and voting. I believe that voting should be mandatory, like it is in other countries. I believe you said they fine you in Australia if you don't vote. It's pretty much mandatory. I would go as far as to say if you don't vote, I would almost be okay with stripping someone of their citizenship. What's your view on mandatory voting, and kind of saying, hey, if you want to live in America, you have to do jury duty. There are a few things that we don't ask a lot out of you,
Yeah.
but there are a few things we need you to do to participate to keep this society going.
Yeah, I support national service, so I'm not against anything like that.
Conscription?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
for that. Yeah, I'm for those things because I think it does a lot. I think because we're paying income tax anyway our whole lives, the argument that you can't force somebody to work for the government is null. And I think that it does a lot to do, like, I think it's good for national cohesion and kind of internal nation building. And I think it's good for young people too. It teaches them discipline and purpose and stuff like that.
Give some camaraderie, and also
Yeah.
people are more I don't want to say they're more anti-war, but they're more careful about military interventions when they actually had to be in the military.
Yeah, totally. So so I favor that. So I would also favor mandatory voting, except I do think that I would include a none of the above option. I know people
Yep.
say that nullifies the point, but
No, I
part of it's
100%
just
agree.
turnout. Like, I think most people, if they were forced to get out and vote, would vote for one of the parties. A lot of them, it's just laziness.
Yeah.
Like, I think if most people had to actually go out and vote, they would just choose somebody instead of just making it pointless and saying none of the above. There's a few that would do that, but I think it would, force people off their asses to vote.
No, I agree, and I would go a step above. If none of the above, which I would add, if none of the above got more than 15, 20%, I would bar every single person from running in the next election and have an immediate re-election, and not allow anyone who ran to run in the next election. And so it would have to be completely new people in that election, and it would be a do-over, because I really believe if we had a none of the above option, especially if we got rid of political parties, I think that we would see much more nuanced thinkers. And I think just, the bad eggs who have name recognition they have name recognition because they have significant audiences. But if they have significant audiences of people who disagree with them, banning them from running immediately after would kind of help with polarization, I feel like. Well, what's your thought on that?
So is this a question about, like, term limits, or?
No, it's just if someone's running and a none of the above gets a certain threshold, you can't run again for office immediately. You have to wait until the next election.
So you mean everybody else in the ballot, though?
Everyone on the ballot cannot run, and it's a completely
cool.
new ballot.
Yeah, that actually, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, 'cause none of the above has to actually mean something. It has to be meaningful. If you're going to force people to vote, you have to their votes have to actually be meaningful. So, yeah, I would agree with that. That you have to bar them from being able to run again. Although, somebody still has to win that election. So I guess that person could have their one term or whatever, but they won't be able to run again because they didn't have a proper mandate the first time or whatever.
Yeah, and what's your view on term limits? For me, I think that every single government position should have one term limit, and if you want to run again, you have to choose a different government position, and you only get one term limit. And I would go as far as to say one term limit of 1 year or one term limit of 2 years. In America, we have 350 million people. I think we have enough people to run for politics.
That's interesting. You say, like, for 1 year or something. I think that would make that's interesting. That's interesting because if there's term limits, then, because I was going to say I don't like how it's every 2 years there's a new election, because it forces people to constantly think about having to be reelected and to think in the short term and not the big Chinese century-based policy. But if people can't get reelected for whatever role they're in, they're going to do the right thing. They're going to do the smart thing instead of the politically expedient thing. So, yeah, I think unless somebody persuades me otherwise, I would support term limits. I think it would force people to not just constantly think about getting reelected and to do the right thing and the smart thing.
And then one other thing I'd like to add on this note, I'm not sure if I would propose this, but it's a thought experiment. What do you think if we treated government, and we couldn't treat all of the positions in government, let's just say some positions in government similar to jury duty, where you're randomly selected and you're going to be in there for 1 year, and then it would kind of be like an oh shit moment for the public, and we're going to be like, okay, we got to pay more attention to politics because one of us is in charge, kind of thing. And it would be randomized, and I feel like it would give a better representation of the people because it would be a random sampling, but at the same time, there would be an education hurdle. But I feel like the bar of citizenship would be raised if you could randomly be selected for congressmen at random, and we would.
I'd rather have it be meritocratic. Frankly, I'd rather there be some kind of system to appoint people, be it an election or be it just like appointments where there's some meritocracy involved. I wouldn't just want the average random person running the government. Sure. or running these jobs. I think you need to have a good government. So I'd be wary of putting. I really don't think the average. Frankly, I don't think the average person should be like the truly average person, like 100 IQ American, should be anywhere near a position of power like that.
It's a fun thought experiment, though. I like to think about it sometimes. But let's talk a little bit about just political elections, and I'm sure you're aware that when I think it was Kennedy versus I forgot who it was, but it was the first televised presidential debate, and if you listen to it on the radio, you came away thinking, hey, this guy won. And then if you watched the video, you thought that Kennedy won. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, I know this. This is like classic kind of like political science stuff.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Should we have debates? Should we not let people watch debates? Should we release the video 2 days after the audio? Should we make candidates write it out and have debates via text? I mean, there are some people, and I think they have a good argument, that we should have people do email exchanges because it's easier to hash out your real thoughts in text form, and it's tougher to, use a good tone of voice and use a joke to get the leverage, and, it's tougher to use logical fallacies in text than it is in debates. What's your view on that? Is there anything we can do? Because one of the big reasons why Trump got in is because he's charismatic, and people don't like to say it, but, Trump is funny. I don't agree with him on everything.
Yeah, no, he is. He's quite funny, yeah.
He is, and he knows how to talk. He speaks at a great level, a little bit lower than he speaks, I would say, at an average IQ level, maybe a little bit lower, and I think he does it on purpose, by the way, which is something we can get into. But he speaks at a lower than average IQ level. He uses emotion, and I think that's one thing that really helps him. But I think it's bad for the future of the country because we need to get someone like a Sam Harris that's long and boring. No offense, Sam, but long and can give you the whole shebang in one elegant sentence, and not use emotional pleas to get votes.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'd never thought about the email exchange possibility, but that's very interesting. I think we do need to do something to undermine the artificialness of politics and of the personality and the theater and all of that stuff. Because why, people don't unless you're like rallying a country for war or whatever, and in the case of the US it'll probably be for a dumb war. Like, you don't really need the charisma, or like the charisma isn't really a asset to the actual job of being president.
Yeah,
So there's way too much charisma is way too heavily selected for in the selection process for the job. So yeah, I think that some kind of, it might even just be like there's a person, the different people take turns presenting. Uh, this is the one person's platform. This is the other person's platform, basically. And it could just be like that. It could just be like you tell people the platforms.
yeah.
Now, you need to get debate about the platforms and introduce them to the pros and cons, but maybe then that's more a job for like the campaign team. Then it becomes who has a better campaign operation instead of who has better policies. But yeah, this whole situation now where it's like, oh, who was sweating more on the stage, or who had the more confident posture on the stage, or like who's taller or whatever, because apparently the taller candidate usually wins. Like, it's nonsense. It's
It's
clearly anti-meritocracy, and it's silly and corrosive.
yeah, it speaks a lot about the average voter. Yeah, what's your opinion on voting tests, IQ tests to vote, or basic knowledge of the platform? Because what gets me is you'll see videos where they, use some of Bernie Sanders' policies, Medicare for all, for example, and they say that Trump said it, and then the Trump fans love it, and then after they say, "Oh, Bernie said it," and now they're against it. And if you don't tell them who's attached to the idea, the American people overwhelmingly, even Republicans, support a Medicare for all single payer system or some version of it. But when you attach the D or the R or Trump is against it, they just follow like they're following a leader.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's a YouTuber who I don't really want to signal boost, but who went from being a far right ethno nationalist to not being one, because he realized when he started looking at the data more carefully that he, as a conservative, like a conservatarian or conservative libertarian, doesn't actually agree with white people more than other people. It's just that the issues in America are constantly framed in this Democrat versus Republican lens that tends to make white people who tend to be Republican adopt conservative positions. But if you ask them the questions stripped of any partisanship or stripped of any party or politician identification, they support things like Medicare for all and all that stuff as well. So it's interesting. And you mentioned like whether there should be like IQ tests to vote or whatever. Um, I would be against that, to be honest. I mean, at that point, you basically would have an aristocracy, and maybe there's an argument. Actually, I wouldn't say the argument for that's very strong, because you need to ensure that the interests of everyone in the society are represented. Just morally, I'm against, barring some people from being able to vote. But also, your vote is your voice, right? If you can't vote, you don't have a voice, and
Yeah.
you need to make sure the people are taken care of. And obviously, that's good for their own sake, and that's good in of itself. That's an inherent good, but it's also good because if people don't have a political voice, they turn to violence, right? They turn to violence and revolution, and you don't want that.
No, that's the last thing we want. Um, you live in Canada. Um, you're pretty vocal about that in your videos with your accent. I don't think I'm giving anything away. Do you
Yeah.
want to speak briefly about the Canadian healthcare system? Because as an American, sometimes we hear stuff and then we hear other things, and some Canadians like Stephen Crowder, who I believe renounced his Canadian citizenship, or maybe he still has it. Maybe he's just dual. But he makes videos attacking the system. But when I talk to people who live in Canada, they like it. They say it's much better than the U.S. system, and it's not perfect, but very few things in life are perfect. So
yeah, there's probably countries out there with better systems than ours. Like the Australian one is, I think, better. I think even Noam Chomsky said it's better, even though it's technically to the right of us. Overall, I mean, I think we should have some more private options and market forces and stuff in Canada, because our wait times are a real problem. I think some of that would be good, but it's certainly a lot better than the American system.
What are the wait times?
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Just one moment.
Yep.
I am. Yeah. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll wrap this up in like. Okay, I'll wrap this up in like. Hey, can you hear me now? I just unmuted my mic.
Yep.
All
Do
right,
you need to go?
I need to go in like 5 minutes. So we'll cool. This will be the last subject.
Sounds good.
I'll finish the plan and wrap it up. Yeah, I think it's better than the American one. We do have overall better health outcomes than the US, and we spend less of our GDP on healthcare. So I think that just about says it all. Yes, there's metrics that are worse. The wait times are worse, but overall it seems to be better. Although Canada's isn't the best. There's better systems. It's funny. I saw this thing the other day. I saw Jonah Goldberg, that's his name, right? Jonah Goldberg.
I believe so.
Gold something. Tweeted out this article, and he tagged like Bernie Sanders and all these other people in it. It was this story about how in the UK, like due to healthcare rationing, there's going to be people going blind or whatever. But the thing that's missing there is that makes it sound like, oh, this British system, the NHS, is so terrible. And it's like, well, it's not the system is bad. It's the fact that Britain is currently like underfunding their system. Like that's my rule. If you have a system, you need to fund that system well. Yeah. And so you will get these stories of the UK, like of people going blind and stuff because they're not getting their because they're not going to get their surgeries. But that's not a problem with their system per se. That's a problem with the fact that they're chronically underfunding their health service. And it is, if you look at the numbers, like Britain spends like a third on healthcare or something. Like, like per person, they spend like 3,000 something per year. And the US spends like 9,000 something per year on healthcare. It's something like that per capita. And so imagine if Britain spent as much in their system on healthcare as America does. Like, you actually want to compare the systems, you'd have to have equal funding. So if Britain tripled their healthcare funding, you think there'd be those people going blind? No, of course not. So often people will like look at systems that are being underfunded and say like, oh, that's an evidence that the system's bad, or they'll find these like flaws in it. But I think overall our healthcare system is good. I mean, it ranks as one of the best in the world. It ranks when they do the overall thing more than America's does. Could we fund it more? I think we actually should fund healthcare more in Canada. And I think we could improve it. There's probably certain like policy mechanisms we could use to improve it. There's better systems to learn from. But yeah, I find that too. I hear all these kind of like conservative Americans or like Canadian conservatives that are like trying to appeal to American conservatives saying stuff about the Canadian healthcare system that I don't hear very often from like normal Canadians here,
Let's specifically talk shortly about the wait times. Let's say I'm Canadian tomorrow, okay, I become Canadian. Let's say I want to go and get a checkup from a doctor, my GP, I want to do a checkup, run a few blood tests. How quickly can I get in? Is it like a schedule, like once every 6 months?
If you're lucky, you can go in on one of the open days on like a Saturday morning and just get in. But it's probably like you're probably looking at a week or two.
Okay, no, that's not bad. I mean, in America, I schedule my appointments out a week anyway, as it is. They usually say we have
it might
next
be more like
Wednesday.
2 weeks.
So
it's
like, less than a month, though. It's
Yeah. Oh yeah. For your general doctor, I mean, it could be a month if they're busy, but if you want to see a specialist, it takes a long time. Although, like a specialist can be a few months. Now,
Wait,
obviously, if your doctor sees you and thinks you might have cancer or something, you'll be taken care of earlier. But if you want to see a specialist, that's going to take a few months. But I don't know if it's different in the U.S. or not.
so let's take that. So let's say, I'm, God forbid, I'm like 75 years old, go in, the doctor thinks I have some kind of cancer, refers me to a specialist. What kind of wait time am I looking at?
I don't know if they think you have cancer. I'm not sure if it's something where like they don't have the expertise to be able to figure everything out by themselves, but they don't think it's a massive problem. Then I know from personal experience, it's probably going to be a few months.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like a person and they think you have cancer but just aren't equipped to deal with it, they're gonna probably not. They're probably gonna actually like send you right to the people that deal with cancer and stuff to look at you and do like a scan. And if you are found to have cancer, it's you're not going to be waiting that long. I mean,
And
I
for
I
like,
I, I thank God haven't had that experience personally, but I would have to ask around more. But like, you're not going to be left. You're not going to be left like waiting for a long time if you have cancer or probably have cancer or they think you might have cancer. They're gonna speed you along.
and so the idea that some American conservatives say is if you have cancer, you're screwed in Canada because you're going to be waiting for months. And if it was America, you could go in next week and get it cut out. That's not an accurate picture.
Yeah, I don't know. I do not believe that's
Okay.
that's an accurate picture.
Okay. Well, Scotch,
I
thank
mean,
you.
I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, there is not that kind of disparity between Canada and the U.S. Like, if it is something they can like cut out of you now, they need out of you now, they will probably just do that fairly soon. Here, again, I don't. I feel blessed to not know too much about it, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think that speaks to like a so far, like just knock on wood, a good
Yeah,
experience that I hope to maintain. But yeah,
great,
yeah, that's my knowledge on that.
great, great. Well, thank you, Scotch, for joining me, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Oh yeah, no, this is a very interesting conversation. I mean, it went for a long time, which means that it was interesting. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll see you. Maybe talk to you later, or whatever.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And I'd like to direct everyone over to ScotchOikos, his channel on YouTube. And also, please subscribe to me, Political Singularity. And then check out my website, politicalsingularity.com. We're doing some renovation, but it should be live early tomorrow at the
Also, do
latest.
you want me to mirror this to my channel, or would you rather
Yeah,
no
yeah.
comment? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
please, please.
All right. Cool. All right. So I'll do that. I gotta go eat now, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep, yep. It was a pleasure.